Greetings and salutations, friends. Character NPC back at the gaming table today with another GDW or GDR or HMS Europa. In this case, a scenario from Daniel T. Shaw, Khalkhin Gol, 1939, which is the battle for a town, and basically just to push the edge. And the war hasn't started yet, and there were already some incidents between what is Mongolia. Here you can see the red border line through this Lake Bur, B-U-I-R, and the Khalkhin Gol River running along this border here. So the Soviets say, well, the border includes this town here of Nomonhan on the other side of the river. You can see their road running to it, but also the over in what was Manchuria, Manchukuo, the Japanese called it, after they took it over in 1931. Established what was the name of the Kwantung Army over here in Manchukuo. So already in 1937, June 19th, 1937, and June 30th, the same year, there was an altercation, couple of situations in a different part up here. This being the Soviet Union. You can see how this 1937 situation happened, this June situation happened with the Soviet border, right? Manchukuo here, and Mongolia being this part where Khalkhin Gol is, the map that we're using, a different place. So there were already incidents that were happening where in the first situation, the Japanese destroyed some equipment, a gunboat, and some troops on the Soviet side took over this island. And essentially at the end of the day, the Japanese ambassador meets with the Soviet Commissar of Foreign Affairs, Maxim Litvinov, on June 29th. And after stating their piece, the Soviets say, well, in good faith, we'll agree to pull back our forces from the Amur River to defuse the situation. So they didn't want to start a war. I'm not sure whether there's an axis yet or not, because when we played our first game, the Czech invasion in 1938, that didn't have a formal declaration of war. It's not until our next game, Poland, where Germany will declare war officially on Poland before they invade. So the Soviets don't want to engage in all-out war yet, but there's all these land grabs going on around the world. Mussolini's about to send Graziani across into Libya and start, and he said he was afraid he was too late because everybody's feeding off of the Spanish and Portuguese Civil War. I kind of wish we had gone back and played some of that, because that's really when the Germans are creating panzers. The Me-109 enters service with the what is really the beginnings of the fascists. So it's the test bed for the German equipment, what Hitler's been doing, even though the Treaty of Versailles said they can't. And they shouldn't be creating all that equipment. Anyway, I'm retelling history that you probably already know about. So in this case, the Soviets backed down in 1937, June of 1937. Then in July of 1938, closer to time when we're talking about, this is just before the Czech invasion happens, but it's after Vienna has been aligned with Germany. So there's already been expansions going on. And a particular regiment launched a night sortie, and Japanese engaged Soviet units, and there were some casualties on both sides, but basically, after the Japanese attack happened, with all the numbers that they had the greater force, and there were some casualties on both sides. And then another incursion happens where it's a surprise, and it was more even odds, 379 Japanese to 300 Soviet troops, but the Japanese just basically surprised them, and they were devastated. So the Japanese ambassador looks at this situation and asks for peace. In this case, again, not really wanting to go to war with the Soviet Union, satisfied that the incident had been brought to an honorable conclusion on 11th August 1938 at about 1:30 local time. So, I mean, this is documented history, right? And then the Japanese stopped, and fighting, ceased, and then the Soviet forces reoccupied the heights. So all of this was happening somewhat to the extent of, wars coming, and political leaders, dictators or not, are seeing situations where, hey, this thing that I've had this grievance over, or the pressing of my neighbors and gobbling up a little bit of land and testing things, is a theme that's going on around the world, really. That's how I see this part of history. So in this case, though, in Khalkhin Gol, what we have is, again, this borderline here that establishes Mongolia that's aligned with the Soviet Empire. Here in Manchukuo, the roads all lead to the town of Nomonhan. Nomonhan is on the opposite side of the Khalkhin Gol River, so it's an easy place, I think, to stick your finger in your enemy's eye and see what happens. But it makes it difficult terrain, in my view, both because there is an option for an opportunity, not an option. The rules state that the Japanese can be within these hexes directly on the other side of the river, of the border, while this second red line, which basically establishes these 4 hexes as the victory conditions for the scenario, it's all about these 4 hexes. The Soviets cannot go into the adjoining hexes on the other side because Stalin really just does, the Soviets don't want to encourage a war. They don't want to go out into open war, so they're not going to step across that further disputed line. But here it's clearly disputed because it's on the map, and, one party is saying this, the other party is saying that, and these things happen, but especially at this time as the world is kind of imploding on itself here. So this was super interesting. First off, it's easy to create because it's not a part of a box set. The whole reason why we did this is because the battle that the Soviets had throughout World War II, at the end of World War II, with the Japanese being driven out of Manchukuo, and the eventual battle that the Soviets undertook to drive the Japanese out of Manchukuo, ending World War II after, it was happening at the same time that Truman is dropping the atomic bombs and the Japanese are capitulating to the Americans. But the war didn't quite end just as people think. Your history tells you that, we dropped the bombs and the war ended. There was still a huge army, millions of people fighting in what was at that time considered Manchukuo and owned by the Japanese before it was turned back into Manchuria. So as I mentioned, I really didn't see any good games, and there was certainly nothing in Europa that I was aware of that covered Manchuria. I think it's a gap generally in hex and counter war games. I'm not positive about that. Maybe you know of one that covers Manchukuo and that battle between the Soviets and the Japanese that ended the war. I think the Soviets had like 4 armies, and while it wasn't all that long a battle, it was still a significant one that really kind of closes out, other than the renegades, holdouts of the Japanese across the islands and things. That happened. There are stories about people staying out there on the Japanese side up until I think like the 60s. Maybe I have that wrong, but anyway, holdouts. The way this worked, though, so you start with this order of battle. For the Soviet, there's just this Mongolian cavalry platoon, smallest unit I've ever seen in Europa, and mixed fighter unit, and then a mixed fighter unit for the Japanese. And there's really nothing on the map at that time but these permanent airfields for both sides. But you don't really have any aircraft, and that puts these mixed fighter units too far away to interdict. Really, their range is too small. So the Japanese, with their first forces, they've got some construction units and they have a resource point. So he created, my opponent created an airfield. I believe it was this permanent airfield here, which then, of course, allowed him to transfer the fighter and become really active in the game, right? And with this being a 0 strength unit, an overrun is assured as long as you have at least a 1. So, you're going back and forth, attacking and destroying the enemy units that are within these 4 hexes. And the objective is to have more hexes at the end of the phasing player's turn. So if it's the Soviet turn and I'm ending it with 1 hex and there are no Japanese owned hexes, or 2 versus 1, right? It just has to be more. You end that way, then you would get a victory point. And of course the same for the other side. So it was kind of tit for tat early on because these units can be overrun. There are no divisions. Everything's a company or a battalion, and then you start to get into some regiments after a couple of turns, and you get some anti-aircraft. So aircraft is really important. You can also see here in the order of battle that these resource points that allow you to build a permanent airfield, the Soviets only get 1 and the Japanese get 2. That ended up being critical because it gave my opponent an opportunity to build more permanent airfields, therefore having more aircraft within range to conduct the various air operations that end up being really important in this game, very valuable. As play continues, you're basically gaining and losing units that are attacking into and between these 4 hexes. And it really didn't take long at all for me as the Soviets to get behind in victory points because I'm just not that good at it yet. I still don't have the nuances down to the game. And this particular river here in between, and the Soviets always having to attack across the river, I struggle with how I would have done that. It probably is the fact that I'm being too defensive. I'm not being aggressive enough and strategic enough in which hexes I try to get them out of or into, or whatever the case is. But with all the halves and then maybe quartering, because you don't have divisional units, you have these smaller battalions and things, even your regiments without artillery, you don't have the heavy weapons to be at your full combat strength. So you're halved already, and then you're attacking across a river, you're basically down to 1/4, and 1/4 of 1 isn't a whole lot. So yeah, it was tough, and we played twice, and I lost both times to my opponent, which is fine. I learned a lot, and this scenario is by Daniel T. Shaw. You can do a search for his name, and you'll find his website, which is called Games at War. He produces some vassal module of this, and he has some miniature rules. So if you're into, I forget the scale, but anyway, it's miniature, right? It's different from the GDW Europa stuff. So this is a great scenario. I highly suggest getting it. And he gives reference to where all of his information is coming from for the order of battle and how things happened. And these are, it looks like some of it focused from one guy who was doing a lot of work with the U.S. military. Anyway, I won't go through these. You can read them for yourself. Really cool scenario, and this is just printed again because it's not a box set. This is printed onto cardboard stock and glued together with your favorite kind of either quick, or I use white glue a lot. My opponent uses this kind of stuff that's almost like airplane glue. So yeah, I mean, you go to Vassal. You can print off the units, create your own set. It's all the standard Europa rules, and we are using Wavell's War as our master rules for this set of battles. The next one will be Poland, 1939. This is the beginning. This is 1939 in May. May to last turn is August. Second half of August 1939. And then I forget exactly when Hitler goes into Poland, but it's maybe September, maybe the month before this ends, or it's right in line pretty much. So stay tuned for that. This was really exciting. I really enjoyed it. I feel blessed to have found somebody who will come over and hang out, and we go have lunch and everything. And that's really what this was all about for me. I started this channel because I was pulling these great games that I played as a kid and have always enjoyed, and now that I have time, I'm getting them back out, saving them, make sure that the attic isn't consuming them with heat rot or silverfish or whatever. And I thought it would be role playing. It didn't turn out to be first edition AD&D. It's Europa instead, and I am loving the hell out of it. So thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more.